Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. As always, wherever in the world you're listening to us from, whatever platform you are listening to us on, thank you guys so much for the support, all of the messages, all the emails, tweets, things that you've sent personally to me or the show's way. I do truly appreciate it, and I'm really excited to get jumping in here into this episode where we get into a real fun topic, which I know that a lot of you as listeners love hearing about different programs and their culture and different coaches and their philosophy when it comes to building culture. I know a lot of you listening are in situations right now where you're taking over programs, you're building, you're rebuilding, trying to kind of establish culture, try to reestablish maybe a lost culture, and really trying to get that side of things on track. So anytime I have a guest who's willing to talk about their experience of that, it's super exciting for me, and I love bringing them on. So that's going to kind of be the focus today as we focus on this concept of what's called an earn everything culture. And I'm going to talk with my guest about what that means, how it gets implemented, how it kind of looks in terms of a practical day-to-day sense, and everything in between. So very happy to be joined by a very busy individual who, as he will, I'm sure, share, is also kind of in the whirlwind of taking over at a new spot. But it's very exciting to welcome the Headbends basketball coach at Treasure Valley Community College. Very happy to be joined by Coach Coach Holbrook today. Coach, again, really appreciate you coming on and joining us. How are we doing today?
Doing well. I appreciate you giving me the chance to come on and talk about something I feel strongly about, and hopefully spreading that great culture and just the little things around that'll help other coaches wherever they're at in their careers as well.
Awesome. All right, Coach, let's jump into you and your basketball journey and your coaching journey. So talk to us about where this game of basketball has taken you, where this coaching journey has taken you, and ultimately, how did you end up at your most recent spot right now, which is Treasure Valley?
Yeah, so I grew up in northern Idaho, small town, Priest River, Idaho. Great place to grow up, great family, all those things. And I was fortunate enough to have some success. We won a state championship. We did some things like that, and then I had some individual success as well. Ended up actually playing in the Eastern region at Spokane Community College under the current head coach there, Coach Growth. And then I transferred to Oregon University, where I played there for a year. Got out of that, got into just kind of some real world stuff, was working security for a while, and just missed kind of the team atmosphere and being around college athletics. So while I was finishing up my degree at University of Idaho, I actually played in Spokane Hoop Fest, played well. Coach Growth from Spokane was there and everything. And he came up to me and said, like, hey man, we could probably find you a spot. But at the time I was one semester away from finishing my 2 bachelor's degrees. And I was like, I've kind of hung up the thought of playing college basketball, but I'd love to get into coaching. And then about 2 weeks later, he called me and said, hey, I have an assistant coaching spot open. Would you be interested in it? And he took me out to lunch to his favorite spot, Red Robin. And we kind of sat down and talked about the details, and it worked out well. Spent 4 years there with Spokane Community College, coaching under him as his assistant. And then I got my master's degree and did my graduate assistant stuff at Dickinson State under Coach Selvig, where I got to also be the head coach of the JV team. Spent 2 years there, got my master's, and then went to Dawson Community College for 2 years. Got to coach under Coach Peterson, where we had a ton of success, and kind of where I adapted a lot of things that I take on now. And then, I think it was mid-June, I got the job here at Treasure Valley and kind of just been rolling with it since.
Fantastic. Awesome. And as we kind of talked a little bit before we started recording, I know that this is a position that just you recently took. So at the time that we're recording this, I know you've been at Treasure Valley here for a couple months, and I was curious about taking a position so late in the summer. When you were offered the position, you accepted it. What was kind of your next steps of like, okay, what do I do now? What did you kind of prioritize, and how did you kind of plan like what you were going to do, kind of like your first few actions or your first few weeks now that after you had taken the job?
Yeah, so it was interesting for me because while I was at Dawson Community College, I was also the housing director, the sports information director, and an adjunct faculty member, as well as the assistant one position. So I didn't want to leave Dawson high and dry because I enjoyed all my time there, all those things. So I actually stayed there for another month, helping them get housing figured out, helping them get the website ready. So I spent a month still in Glendive recruiting the players to come play here, and I hadn't really stepped on campus yet. But in terms of my first thoughts in this position, it was for sure I have to get as many returners back as I can because obviously they won an Eastern Region Championship last year, had really good freshmen, and when I actually got the job, they kind of told me like, "Hey, all of the freshmen have asked for their release, and we're not going to give it to them until like they talk to you," kind of thing, which was I was extremely grateful for because I got to get on with them and show them who I am, talk to them, get to know them better. So my first goal was to get them back. And then my second goal was to try to bring in as much talent as I could midway through the summer.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's really interesting that you kind of had like wheels. It seemed like we're all already in motion, where there was things already in place, and you were had like something already like set, ready to go right as the job took. So it's kind of a unique perspective where you weren't like taking a job and didn't have any background or a lot of background about what was going on, and we're starting from scratch. You already kind of had a foundation that already kind of been established before you took it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate through my
Hmm.
coaching career to work for really good head coaches. And I think I took really important things from every single one that I coached for. So when I got this job, I mean, it didn't feel overwhelming to me. It felt kind of something that I prepared myself for.
Right.
Obviously, I can't say I prepared for everything because
Yeah, yeah,
there are some things that pop up that you can't compare for or
sure.
prepare for. But yeah, I feel like because of what I did as an assistant and because of my head coaches I worked for trusting me and being able to be a big part of the program, they all kind of helped me step into a situation where I can hopefully have success.
No, that's awesome. Coach, I know we're going to focus a lot on the culture aspect, and I wanted to make sure I addressed with you and let you speak a little bit about your passions from an X's and O's standpoint. So, if you would kind of talk us through what is it that you're kind of passionate about, or what is it that you kind of prefer? I know a lot of it may be personnel based, but what are your preferences in terms of X's and O's of what you like to be running on offense and defense?
Yeah, so I mean, to me, it starts out on the defensive end. I love pressure. I love to turn people over. And I sit down every year at the beginning of the year in our first team meeting, and I ask my guys like, "Hey, what are your guys' goals?" Because I genuinely want to coach you to your goals. And luckily, their goals aligned with mine. I didn't tell them what I was thinking, but they said they want to have or they want to be number one in the NWAC in steals and number one in the NWAC in rebounds. And I think those two things go hand in hand perfectly together because I'm big on playing fast, getting up and down the floor. We're going to try to score as many points in transition as we can because we have our transition stuff is like, yes, it's free, but there's also concepts to it. So it's not just open gym basketball. And with that being said about the steals and rebounds, like analytically speaking, a live ball turnover is one of the highest percentage shots in the game of basketball. So if we can actually lead the NWAC in steals per game, we're giving us a ton of really high percentage shots. And then if we can lead the NWAC in rebounds, that's going to one, stop their team from scoring when we're getting defensive rebounds. And two, offensive rebounds are also one of the highest analytical possessions you can have because if you have an offensive rebound, it means the defense is out of position.
Hmm.
So what happens then is a lot of times they foul out of position, they do those things. So everything we do is kind of based on that. We're really trying to speed teams up. We're trying to make them feel uncomfortable. We're going to pressure a lot, and we actually do something pretty interesting that a lot of people don't. Is we'll crash all five. And that's kind of for rebounding and defensive transition because we talk about being on the high side all the time. So if we crash all five and we're on the high side, great, we get an offensive rebound. If not, we're on the high side and we can pressure right away.
Yeah, so it's constant. It's constant pressure, and that's really cool. And I like that a lot. And I think that um and you can speak to this too. I think that there's a certain element in which I'm sure the culture is kind of tied into what it is like what it is that you want to run, like the way that the culture that you like to establish, and that the coaching staffs that you've been on like to establish, naturally lends itself to where this is the type of style of basketball that you're going to need to want to play and buy into, because that's already kind of embedded in our culture. Are those things kind of intertwined with each other?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's actually a great point because I mean, with the earn everything culture, it means you're totally bought in. It means you're tough. It means you're going to push through, and rebounding, pressuring, all those things we're going to do are a toughness thing because there's going to be a time on the floor where, I mean, both teams are tired, but what team can tough it out? And those are really the times where if we're a little bit tired and we make another team like exhausted, then we can go on runs and the lead's going to go from 8 or like 6 to 12 or whatever it may be in a couple quick possessions because we're constantly after people and we're constantly like pressuring up. And really what happens, we talk a lot about not gambling. Like I don't believe in like pressure and gambling. Like I know a lot of college kids think kind of like, hey, if we're pressuring, I get to gamble. Like, no, the pressure itself is what's going to make teams turn it over. So we're going to talk a lot about not gambling, and those are all things that kind of go with our culture too. Like we do the little things at a really high level, and good things are going to happen for us.
Yeah. So let's talk about, let's transition right into that. Just define, coach. We'll start with there about what is the earn everything culture? How did it kind of get its name? What does it look like? Kind of paint the picture for our listeners here about what this culture is all about.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, it just means doing everything at a high level, and when I say everything, I mean going to class, I mean getting sleep, I mean your diet right. Another thing our guys are doing is drinking a gallon of water every day. Like they walk in my office every day, and every single one of them has a big gallon jug of water. And it's just doing those little things at a high level, taking care of your body. To me, like it all starts the night before. Like you get a good night's rest, you wake up ready for class, you go or to go to class, you earn that by waking up on time. And then one, or if somebody misses class, you don't get to participate in any basketball related thing that we have that day. So you earn going to weights, you earn going to practice, you earn going to class, or you earn playing in games by going to class. And that starts with waking up on time, not being late, and showing up. And I'm big on, I want my guys to be in the front row every day. Like I tell my guys, like, hey, you go into the classroom, you sit in the front of the class, you're attentive, you don't have your hoods on, you don't have headphones on. Like this is a big portion of why you're in college, is every single one of you needs to get a degree. And I mean, for everybody in the world, the ball stops bouncing at some point, right?
Right,
So
right.
that degree goes a long way. And I really push home going to class. And one thing we do is we also do class checks every Friday. So we'll have every single guy on the team will either come meet with me or one of my assistant coaches on Friday. They'll pull up their grades. We'll look at each class, make sure they're not missing assignments. Say a guy's missing 3 assignments in a class, then that guy doesn't get to participate in anything basketball wise until they've made up those 3 assignments. So it's literally, we're doing like every little thing we can do. We're trying to do it at the highest level. And us as coaches are trying to hold them accountable to that as well with the class checks and those things.
So at the collegiate level, how do you kind of identify people who are going to be right fits for that culture? What kind of ways can you kind of assess if this is going to be a guy who's really going to understand what this culture means and actually fit in and really buy into to the concept of earning everything?
Yeah, the beautiful thing about college basketball is you get to recruit. And that's exact, like while I'm recruiting kids, I'm 100% honest with them. I won't lie to get a good kid here. I tell them my exact expectations. I let them know, like, hey, these are the things we do here when we're going to class. We're in the front row. We're going to do class checks. And I let them know the punishments as well. I actually had a kid on campus the other day for a visit, and we were doing some open gym stuff, just getting up and down. And the recruits, my guys, like they just weren't doing things to our level, like our standard that we set set. So I actually blew my whistle with the recruit there, and I made him run laps. And like that's just anybody in my program is going to be held to that standard, whether you're in my gym helping as an assistant for a day or you're there for a recruiting visit. You're held to a standard. And I never want to be fake with people. I'm always myself. I'm never going to be a fake person, anything like that. And I think it goes a long way with that because recruits see that. And one message that I always give the recruits is, hey, I'm never going to lie to you, and I respect the same from you. Like, if you're not a good fit for my program and my culture and what I want, I would rather you tell me that than you come here and it be an issue for both of us. So it all kind of starts with that recruiting pattern and letting guys know. Like when I reached out to even the returners that were, or the freshman guys that wanted their releases early on, I told them right away what my expectations were. I said, hey, like I'll grant you your release if that's what you want. But hear me out first. Like this is going to be our standards. This is what we're going to do every day. You're going to get better. We're going to have success because we're going to do things the right way. And if you want to be a part of that, great. I'll have you back. I'll honor your scholarship. I'll do whatever. But if you don't want to be a part of that, you don't want to be held accountable to that level, then I will sign your release right away and you can go find a new program.
I think that something that you mentioned, which is pretty important and it's tough, I imagine sometimes, is that you have to separate what it is that you see on the court in terms of the ability and potentially the way that this particular player may be able to help you on the court versus like are they actually bought into what it is you're trying to run in terms of your culture, and that you have to be able to, if with a culture like the one that you said, be willing to say like, look, if you're not bought into this, no matter how talented you are, no matter maybe how much you could help us win games, like you don't fit with what it is we are trying to do here in this program. And as a coach, sometimes it's hard maybe to, let those potentially great players go, or players who might be able to do a lot for you on the court, but to be able to kind of say, this, you're not bought in, so this isn't the right place for you, no matter how talented you are basketball wise.
Yeah, and I mean it's kind of one of those things that as obviously the head coach, I have to make those hard decisions. I
Mm,
actually this year I already had to make one of those hard decisions with a kid that was
really?
incredibly talented, a kid that I really liked off the floor, but anytime we were doing anything basketball wise, it was just kind of about him and it was more just yeah, focused on himself than he was the group. And then a couple exchanges him and I had, and I told him, I was like, hey man, like you're just not a good fit for what we're trying to build here and like the program we're having. And he's already with another team. He found a spot. And I told him, like, hey, I don't have any ill will against you. I don't have
Yeah.
like I'm not upset. Like I'm just being honest and straightforward. Like I think you should find another spot that maybe you can do a little bit more and you'll be happier at. And him and I actually still talk to this day. Like it's not a thing that it's a big negative thing. Like we both understood where we were at and we just kind of moved forward. So
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good point that I like that you mentioned, right? It's not like you're saying, oh, like you're dead to me completely as a person. Don't ever look at me. Don't ever talk to me again. It's like you still want what's best for him, but what is best for that player isn't being with your program because they're not gonna fit in with what you're trying to do.
yeah, exactly. And sometimes like obviously some kids don't understand that message right away, but down the road it usually hits home for them and they kind of get what they're saying or kind of get what I'm saying. And I always tell them like, hey, I'm going to make a decision that's best for the program and best for you. And if you put yourself in a position that's above the program, then the program's always going to win. And with that certain individual, I told him like, hey, I want you to learn from this situation. Like you're a really good player and you're going to find another spot, but I want you to learn that like really like everybody's replaceable in some way. And I don't mean to sound super negative by saying that, but like
Mm.
he was just his actions was acting like he was irreplaceable. And it's just like, well, if I keep you on the team, then that's going to further that
Yeah,
thought.
solidify
But
that. Yeah.
yes, but if I tell you you no longer have a spot, I hope this hits home for you. And the next spot you find, I hope it helps you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, that's great. I get the sense, and I want you to speak on this because I was writing this down, and I feel like with this culture, in terms of the implementation, that there's a lot of not just self accountability, but also players are also holding each other accountable in terms of, when it is they get up and getting to things on time, the way they're acting in class. Is that a
Mhm.
big element of your culture in terms of how players are holding each other to these standards? And if so, how does that kind of message kind of get communicated, that players have a responsibility to, be supporting each other and also kind of carrying each other and holding each other to these high standards?
Yeah, that kind of goes along with me having the guys set their goals. When
Hmm.
they told me their goals, I told them, hey, these are the standards that we have to meet to reach these goals. And one of them was to be able to be held accountable by others. It's not a negative thing when your teammate says, hey, I need you to sit down and guard, or like, hey, maybe that's not a great shot. Like, we can't take that as a negative and get defensive. We have to hear that and we have to understand what they're saying and we have to move on from it. So that's something that I talk a lot about with my guys too, because obviously a lot of them are, or every one of them has a roommate with another teammate. So I let them know like, hey, like it partially if your if your roommate doesn't wake up for our early morning practice or isn't waking up for class, like that's not on you, but like you can help that situation. Like you can go in and wake them up. And so far, my guys have done a wonderful job. I know we had a kid that had some food poisoning going on early on, and his roommate every single day would text me and go, hey, coach, like, so and so is not feeling well. He wants to stay home. Like, is that okay? And he kind of told me what was going on. Like, hey, he's in the bathroom all day and he's like been sleeping in there, that sort of thing. It wasn't a great case of food poisoning for him, which is unfortunate. But it was just a beautiful thing that his roommate felt responsible to let me know and keep me in the loop on what was going on. And then he would come to me and communicate with me like, hey, he might be dehydrated. How can we handle that? And then we would sit down and make a plan for it. And it's a thing where like that roommate genuinely wanted the best for his friend and teammate, and that's why he did it.
No, that's great. I think that's you talk about, building like a family, right? And building like a
Mhm.
team of close bonds and a team that looks out for each other and wants what's best for each other. Like I feel like that's the kind of thing you want is you want a player that has your back is not just on the court but off the court. And that's really big. That's really important. I love that you shared that. Something you mentioned though, coach, and I was curious about this, is that you talked about, players being able to hold each other accountable when maybe they're not doing something, maybe it's on the court, right? They get a shot up that isn't
Mhm.
good. They're forcing something, or there's a situation where a player has to maybe be a little bit critical or make a critique of another player. And I'm curious if that is something that is you kind of have to explain to your players how to have that conversation. Was that something that they kind of were able to do because they trusted each other and cared for one another, that they were able to handle those kind of criticisms from one another? Kind of talk about what that process of allowing your players to have maybe those disagreements or those sort of critical conversations with each other was like.
Yeah, one thing that I always preach early on and often is like I get to be the only negative voice. Like the only negative voice is mine.
Mm,
You guys build each other up. So when you're communicating, yes, you can state certain things, but you have to do it in a positive way. Like you can't attack a teammate because anytime somebody's attacked, especially in an emotionally heated position, they're going to get defensive. But if you build somebody up in that situation, like, hey man, you got it. The next time, just swing that. I'll set one for you. You come up, you'll get a wide open one instead of that contested one. And it's something that I talk a lot with my captains about. Like we have bi-weekly meetings with our captains, and I talk to them about each individual and how we should communicate with each individual on the team. Because with my psychology background has helped me a lot in terms of communication and learning people and kind of how to push buttons and get people riled up and all those things. But it's also helped me a lot in terms of showing my guys how to communicate and how we respond in certain situations. And we'll talk a lot about that. I mean, I've had guys in the past who got their only emotion was anger. Like anytime they
mm,
felt emotionally at all, it was either happiness or anger. And really, that's just your neurons in your brain, what you've always developed. And I've had them sit down and I've pulled up articles talking about that stuff, about the neurons in your brain and how you can change it and breathing patterns and all that stuff. And to me, a lot of kids react certain ways because they've never been educated on what emotions are. So I will,
right.
instead of having that fight happen in the corner, I will break that up. I'll pull that person that got defensive into my office and I will talk to them about how they felt, why they felt that way. And then I will educate them with studies that I can research or my knowledge that I have on the situation or whatever it may be. And that's kind of how we build that like communication piece in our program, and how we communicate with each other is understanding each other really.
Is there anything that you could recommend to coaches who might want to learn a little bit more about that psychological side, or be able to kind of kind of draw from that sort of perspective, so that they're able to kind of have these conversations in a productive or meaningful manner? I know you have the background in it, but I was curious if you had any sort of maybe some starting points or advices that maybe coaches could use to kind of navigate through those, pretty difficult and sometimes pretty tense conversations.
Yeah, I think the my best advice for that is try to get the emotions lowered. If there's ever a situation in our program where emotions are really high, I will tell a kid like, "Hey, you and I aren't going to talk till tomorrow, where we both have, or our emotions are settled in. We've thought about it. Then we're going to communicate about the issue where we won't have those emotional responses." And really, what I do a lot of is I'll listen to podcasts on the brain, how the brain works. I mean, just kind of keep up to date with just any psychological website that I like, that talks about different emotions and those things, because really every emotion is its own trigger in your brain, and just the chemical responses that you have. And sometimes it's really, I mean, just those chemical responses are just getting the better of you, and that's why you're acting the way you're acting. And sometimes it's good to just take a step away. Like, I'm totally okay with, if a guy is emotional during practice, I'll tell him, "Hey man, step outside, take 20 seconds, breathe, catch your head, and then get back into the drill." Like, it's okay. Just settle yourself in, breathe a couple times, and then come back out and be ready to compete when you come back out.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you brought up with the, taking time to let the emotions lower, because that's my approach when it comes to conversations with
Mhm.
parents, especially when, parents want to come to me at the, after a game, and they want to have a conversation, and I can tell that, it's probably not necessarily to congratulate me all the time when they want to have a conversation with me. And I'm like, you know what, I gotta separate, that, this is not something that we will do. And so I don't have those conversations with parents until at the very earliest the next day, because we both need to sleep on it. I don't want it to be an emotionally driven conversation. And um, putting that distance between, the game or the situation, and giving it that time to kind of breathe and settle down, in every single case I could attest to, has led to significantly more positive conversations and much better outcomes than me trying to have that conversation at 9:30 right after a game. I can't imagine it would be nearly as productive if we were trying to have a conversation then.
Yes, 100%. I mean, I think, yeah, emotional responses are not always the best responses, whether it's positive emotion or negative emotion. Sometimes it's good to take some time away and think about what you're going to say, and kind of the way you want to speak to somebody as well, because I think that goes a long way. And just in terms of like, um, how I kind of handle that with like our parents and stuff, like when I'm recruiting my guys, I try to build relationships with the mom and the dad. And I'm also very clear with them, when I'm recruiting them. I tell them like, "Hey, like, this is our culture. Like, we earn everything. We earn playing time, all that. And I'll talk to you about anything, how your kid's doing in school, how he's doing outside of like, or in the dorms, if he's going to class, all that. But I will not talk to a parent about playing time." And the beautiful thing is when you set that standard, like, and especially at the college level, when there's scholarship money involved and you're paying them to be there and those things, it makes it a little bit different than the high school level. But when parents understand that standard, I mean, I've talked to multiple parents this year, and it's all about different things. And not a single one has asked me, like, "Hey, do you see my son playing? Or do you see my son having a big role?" Like, it's
Mhm.
always about, how's my son doing? Is he fitting in? Is he enjoying himself? And as long as their kids are doing well in those areas, that's kind of where the parents focus, which is
Right.
nice.
Yeah, that's what you would want, hope, and that's what you'd want to see for sure.
Yeah.
Uh, Earn everything. The big piece of this as well, obviously. I mean, there's tons of big pieces on this, but of course, and you mentioned this too, about earning everything also means earning all their playing time, and earning, whether they're looking to start, whether they're looking to get a lot of minutes, that they have to earn whatever it is that they're getting on the court. So I know you've touched on it a little bit, and I know there's on the court and off the court elements to this, but I wanted to ask you kind of specifically, what do players have to be demonstrating? What are they going to have to be showing in your program, both on the court and off the court, to be earning that playing time, and earning the right to be out there on the court?
Yeah, off the court, just being good people.
Mm,
I told all my guys from day one, like, hey, when you see somebody on campus, say hi, make sure people know who you are, introduce yourself to your teacher, all those things. And then on the court, like, be ultra competitive. Like, I tell my guys every day, like, hey, I want your emotions to be close to like that fight or flight emotion, but I never want it to cross the line. I want you to be amped up. I want you to get after it. And really a big part of that too is the attitude piece and the effort. As long as a guy's giving great effort and he's got a positive attitude towards everything, like we talk a lot about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And I bring that up every day. Every day we're in practice, when guys look tired, I'm like, hey, growth mindset fellas, like welcome this, welcome this. And they've all done a good job rising to the occasion. And then we also stat everything. I mean, even when we're in open gyms, I stat every stat in open gym besides scoring points and field goals, because I want to see what you're doing when the ball's just rolled out. Like, how do you affect the game outside of putting the ball in the bucket? Like, can you rebound? Can you get assists? Can you get steals? Or do you protect the rim? And then those are all like positive stats for us. So every rebound, we track offensive and defensive, and then total, obviously.
Mhm.
And then we do steals, um, blocks, and assists. And then the only negative points are one, foul language, like yelling a word you shouldn't, or having negative attitude towards a teammate. You'll lose a point for that stuff. And then turnovers are also a negative stat. So, and anytime your team wins, so if you're an open gym and you're the first team to 15, you win the game. Every win is worth 2 points. So it kind of makes, that's where the scoring really matters, is getting those 2 points for the wins. And I keep track of that score of every single game in our open gyms. And I let the guys know, like, hey, here's your plus minus for open gyms. Like, you're negative 20 in open gyms. This is how you're impacting your team winning. Like, it's not positive right now. We need to figure that out. And then I'll sit down and have that hard conversation with them. And most of our guys are curious and they want to learn. And they're like, hey, coach, how can I impact my team better? And I'll be 100% honest with them. Like, hey, you need to rebound, or you need to stop shooting these shots. And we'll just, yeah, have those hard conversations, and we all kind of understand, like, my guys are very aware that the guys that are going to help us win games are the guys that are going to see the floor, and that's what all of their goals are, is to help us win games. And the beautiful thing about that with junior college basketball is the more wins you have, the more four-year coaches notice, and then you make
Yep.
the tournament, and that's where the four-year coaches are watching you play, is at the tournament.
And that, I imagine, has to be just that much bigger of an incentive at your level for guys to be earning everything, because they know that they want to be seen, and the only way that they get that is by getting on the court, and that's their time, and they gotta be working towards earning everything on the court so then they can be seen if they're looking to go at a 4-year level. And so I imagine for your guys, like, their motivation already is really high, because a lot of them probably have those aspirations, and then you put in this culture on top of it, and it just adds that, even more extra emphasis, I imagine, for making sure that they do everything as best they can to get their time on the court.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think every junior college athlete has those aspirations to get to the four-year level, whether that's D1, D2, NAI, D3, whatever it may be. But I feel like every guy that comes to play JUCO wants to move on and they want to prove themselves. So yeah, a big thing we talk about too is like how you prove yourself, like what it means to prove yourself. And yeah, part of that is winning and having success as a group. And I sell, or not sell, I tell our guys early on that, hey, like, we're in the NWAC, we're going to get coaches here, yes, but really when a ton of coaches are going to be around playing is at the NWAC tournament.
Right.
And that's where you can really get seen. And I know for me, when I was playing in the NWAC, I had almost no offers throughout the year. And then once I got done with the NWAC tournament, that's when offers actually started coming in. So I kind of sell, obviously, my example with that. And then I
Hmm.
tell my guys just kind of where they're at with everything. And then I let the returners speak on that as well, because obviously they've been to the NWAC tournament and they've seen that as well.
Yeah. You mentioned about charting things and the different stats that you look at, and you talk to your guys about the stats and the things that you kind of notice in the open gyms and the wins and losses on those open gyms type situations. When those stats are being charted, when you're looking at those stats, are there things that have like kind of jumped out on you or kind of surprised you, or things that you noticed? Because I know that those aren't maybe necessarily common practice for a lot of coaches to chart those sort of things, but are there things that you kind of saw when you're like, oh, I never know that, like I never knew that our team, did X, Y, and Z, or our players tend to do X, Y, and Z? What sort of stats or things sort of started to jump out on you, and things that you noticed right away once you started to keep track of those things?
Yeah, I think the biggest one to me is the guys that do rebound and they score high on like the end total score. When they rebound, they get assists, they get steals, they protect the rim.
Mm,
Their plus minuses are always higher. So that's what I sell to my guys. I'm like, hey, look at these scores. Like, you're not rebounding, you're not getting assists, you're not getting steals, you're not affecting the game, and look how your plus minus is. Like, you're hurting your team. But when you're active, you're giving effort, you're playing hard, you're rebounding, then your plus minus is positive. And I make sure I keep track of like the total through every open gym. And then I have every individual open gym scores printed out. And so I can show my guys that. I can sit my guy down and go, hey, last open gym, you were negative 12 and plus minus, and you had 4 rebounds. This open gym, you had 12 rebounds and maybe a couple assists and a couple steals, and your plus minus was plus 12. Like, that's a huge difference. And it's just
yeah.
because you were more active.
Yeah. Yeah, no, no, definitely. And that's something I know I've talked about with other guests as well, and it's so interesting to kind of hear you bring that up when I've heard guests kind of talk about, charting things or keeping stats of things, how, guys or girls may sometimes have this misconception of what they're doing on the court, or they think that they're doing a certain thing, or, they're putting up, certain numbers or giving effort in practice or doing well in practice, but then to actually have those stats or those things that you could literally show them and say, but this is like what the numbers say, I think changes the whole dynamic of that conversation, because it's an objective conversation based on the numbers and the things that you charted, rather than, something that you just observe, and you're just, a player might think that you're making up, or just picking on them for some reason.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and that's kind of that's one thing that when I am making those tough decisions of playing time and stuff, like
Mhm.
that's something I will turn to when I'm talking to a kid that maybe isn't playing as much, is we'll stat everything throughout the year in practice as well. And I can go, hey, like the person getting more minutes than you is doing this every single day in practice, and he's earning that playing time. So that's why he's playing above you. Like, yes, you might have a higher 3-point percentage or you might have a higher field goal percentage, but this guy gets 12 more rebounds a week than you, and we need rebounding. We don't really need scoring as much. So it kind of, yeah, it all kind of plays into it for sure.
Yeah. Talking about practices, I know that practices will kind of change depending on where you are in the season, but what do you do in your practices that really kind of instill and keep on reinforcing this idea of earn everything? What are players doing in your practices or in your training? What is being done that intertwines the basketball stuff that you're working on, but also incorporating all of the culture elements of earn everything in your practices? How do both of them get worked on in your practices?
Yeah, that is actually a big challenge in trying to build this culture is, I mean, I don't want to be a super negative person, especially because I'm early on and I'm building relationships with
Hmm.
guys. But I think the beautiful thing about it is when you're honest with the kid and they understand your standards and what you uphold and where you want them to be, when you do have to get negative with someone, they don't shut down. They understand like, hey, coach is holding me to a high standard and I need to meet that standard. And there's been times, honestly, where I've blown the whistle, said get on the baseline, or I've told the kid like, hey, you're just not in it today. I need you to go sit down and you're going to be out for the rest of the day. And tomorrow you can come back and try to do a better job. And none of them get upset at me. I mean, I'm sure in the moment they are, but they understand that because of our standards and the goals we set and my expectations that I gave them when they were coming here and when they got here, they understand it's not a negative thing coming from me. It's just we're not meeting that standard today. So I'm giving you a second chance. I'm letting you know that you're not there, but I'm also giving you a chance to make it right the next day.
For is that difficult as a coach to kind of like, you know, think about the way that you kind of word those things, where you're trying to get, your guys better, and you're trying to improve them, trying to, get them where they need to be, but also, like you said, being mindful of not being overly critical, where you come across as like, consistently like negative and not happy and criticizing, like is that something that took time to kind of develop? Is that something you're kind of working on? Because I know for me that could be a struggle sometimes, where I'm always trying to get things better. I'm always trying to, improve, and it can come across, I know it has, especially when I was younger, as like nothing was ever good enough. I'm never happy, I'm never satisfied. And I know that that kind of like wore down a few of my teams, because that was, all they ever heard from me. And I'm just curious how you have kind of navigated that coaching voice, where you're working on them and wanting them to get better, but also not, just completely negative all the time.
Yeah, I mean, one way that we do that is we try to celebrate every little win.
Hmm.
One of my guys finished his GED. He had some family stuff. He had to kind of get out of high school, and then to come play, he had to finish his GED. And it was, I mean, he had some obstacles with it. One was his test kept just quitting on him halfway through, so it kind of kept lingering on him, and you could tell that it was taxing him. But when he did finally finish that GED, like the first thing I did that day when we got in the huddle in the weight room was call him out, congratulate him about getting his GED, and have all the guys clap up. Like we get touches every time we hit the baseline, anytime we're together, like we're always picking each other up. And like we try to celebrate all those little wins as well as the big ones, all that. But I also am extremely honest with my guys. Like I'll blow my whistle and tell them, like, hey, I'm not trying to be too critical in this situation, but this is an important aspect of what we're moving towards. Like we haven't talked about it yet, but I just want to put this like thumbnail in it so you guys understand this is going to be important in the long run. And then I try my best to just let them play it out. Like we have some drills in practice where it's like we have a perfect defense drill where it's 3-on-3. We'll do some different things in it, but everything has to be perfect or I blow my whistle and we start over. So I do some drills where it is very critical and all those things, but I also do drills where I give guys the freedom to make mistakes and them communicate and figure it out themselves. So it's just kind of finding that fine balance of being the critic, but also being a cheerleader. Like I tell
Yeah,
all my
yeah.
guys, like, hey, I'm your biggest critic, but I'm also going to be your biggest cheerleader. Like when you get it right, I'm going to pump you up. I'm going to make sure you know you got it right. And we're going to keep moving forward with that progression. So,
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think that, we can lose sight of that sometimes, and definitely need to be celebrating, those successes, because players are getting better. They are accomplishing things on and off the court, and to take time to recognize that, I think is super important, because I'm sure it'll just motivate your guys just that much more, hopefully, to like keep on going, knowing that, yeah, there's going to be mistakes and things that need to be fixed, but they are going to get recognized when they do something well. So they know that like they can succeed. And I think that, for at least for me personally, that was something that I had to really work on with the girls that I coached, is that they needed to know that they were being successful. Sometimes they needed that positive reinforcement, and once they knew that they were gonna, get that when they started to, make strides and make some improvements, then their desire to want to continue to be challenged and continue to be pushed was that much higher, because they knew it was possible for them to like see success, and that I could be celebrating what they were doing. And I think that's just kind of a real good balance of like being motivating, but also like teaching them at the same time, which seems like something that's really important for you.
yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I think, honestly, like I think high level athletes and guys that really genuinely want it, like they
Yeah.
want to be coached. They want to be held to a high
Hmm.
standard. So they welcome that and they welcome criticism. But it also is, like you said, you have to sprinkle in that positive as much as you can. So it doesn't turn into, oh, coach is just so hard on me. He doesn't think I'm good. Like that can never be the case. It's
Hmm.
got to be like, hey, I'm trying to help you. If you do these things, that it will help. And
Yeah.
it's just kind of also how you word things. And it's some of the challenges are like a lot of guys now have trainers and they have guys that help them outside of your program. And I'll run into sometimes guys go, well, like my trainer or like my old coach told me to do this. And I don't go super negative at another person. I always go like, hey, let's try my way and see if it helps. And if it doesn't help you, then we can go back to doing what you were doing. That's totally fine with me. But let's try it and see. And honestly, like sometimes it does help, sometimes it doesn't. And I'm totally fine with that person going back to what they're comfortable with as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you have to, at the college level, and the amount of voices that kids have either had in the past or are currently still having that are with them. indirectly are going to potentially come into conflict with what it is that you're trying to teach them, and the way that you navigate that I think is really important because some of these guys I imagine have a lot of trust or long-standing relationships with these trainers or people or coaches that they still great contact with, and if they feel that there's this adversarial relationships that's coming between them
Hmm.
and you as a coach, like all of a sudden you have potentially an issue that you weren't maybe even expecting. So like to have that to give them that idea of like, hey, let's try this out and let's see what it works, I think probably builds some confidence in your players to know that you're not like immediately dismissive of these other adults in their life who they probably have a lot of strong connections and bonds with.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of those kind of just understanding that, hey, I'm dealing with 18 to 21-year-old kids. Like they have relationships, they have a life, they have those things, and they think really highly of other people. And if I go super negative at somebody that they go or they think very highly about, then I mean, the fact of the matter is like the negativity starts turning on me, and
Hmm.
they start seeing that as me talking bad on somebody, which I never want to do with my guys, especially.
No, no, definitely for sure. Talk to me, coach, about how has this earn everything culture? How does this kind of manifested in game-like situations? Where are times where your culture has really become evident or really like shown itself to you in game-like situations or
Yeah, I
games themselves,
think,
rather? I guess. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, I think a great example of that is just the trying to stay detailed for what our concepts are, like always sticking to our concepts. And I try to tell my guys too, like, hey, there's going to be times where we're down 15. Like early in the game, there's going to be times we're down. But if we stick to what we do every single day and what our concepts are and we stay together, I promise you, we won't be down 15 for long. And I've seen that multiple times at other places I've been, and you help or hold guys accountable to a high level, and they kind of just rise to that level. And I also think when you build trust and you let them know where the standards are, like say a kid's having a bad time in the game for the first 3 minutes, you can take them out and you can say what you need to say, give them time to rest, and then put them back in the game. And they don't go back in with those same emotions that they had that were negative. They go back in with, okay, I'm going to have that growth mindset. I'm going to stick to what we do. I'm going to stick to our standards. And then all of a sudden, that person starts playing a little bit better, and maybe the ball bounces his way a couple times. But it's really just harping on it every single day of like, hey, we have to be bought in as a group. We have to do things together, and we have to earn everything we want. Like, if you want to win, winning a basketball game is not easy. To me, winning is a learned skill. Like some kids have it, some kids need to learn it. And that starts with earning it all. Like, and it's also a beautiful thing when you have success, when you have that earn everything culture, like the locker rooms after games, after big wins, they are special because your guys know that they earned it. Your coaching staff knows that they earned it, and you really get to celebrate earning that victory. It's not a thing where, okay, we rolled the balls out today, we got lucky. Like, no, when it's an earn everything, when we're rebounding every possession, when we're doing our concepts, we earned that victory, and we can genuinely celebrate that win.
And your players then in turn, I imagine like the energy level just has to be super high and super positive and super upbeat because your guys knew the amount of work that had to go into seeing that win and seeing that success, that when they can see their teammates, giving it all and laying everything out there. I imagine like the team chemistry and the excitement they have for one another when they're seeing that maximum effort. I imagine just kind of really creates a high energy, high positive environment where everybody's just amped up. And I imagine the like you said, right, the locker room must be a really fun place to be after that because they know what it took to get that victory.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of starts with that, like picking your teammates up, and like me being the
Yeah.
negative voice. Like we're always trying to pick each other up, whether it's practice or doing a little thing. Like if a guy dives on the floor in my practice, like every guy is gonna go pick him up. We're all gonna celebrate that. If a guy has an extra effort play, I'll blow my whistle and just tell all the guys like, hey, go tell 21 that he made a big time play, dap him up, and then we're back into the drill. Like I make sure I positively reinforce those extra effort plays every single day in everything that we do. And I think the guys kind of build into that too. And when they understand that, hey, we're reinforcing these things, one, they're going to want to do that. And then when they see that, they want to reinforce those actions.
And That is something I think pretty fascinating. I would be curious to get your thoughts on this because you have experience with this. That idea of how to encourage your teammates or the way that you sort of interact with them or physically, build them up and get them up and the way that you kind of compliment one another, get excited for one another. I know that that's something, at least with some teams that I've had, I've really had to like explain what that looks like and explain like how to be like a really positive, really awesome teammate. Not that they didn't want to be, but I think in some cases they just didn't really know like what that means and how it shows themselves. And I'd be curious if that was something that like maybe you kind of had to explain to your guys because or teach them like what that sort of looks like, or is that something that they kind of already knew how to like be that really positive, awesome, encouraging teammate? Like what was that kind of teaching process like?
I think it's a mixture of a lot of things. I think it's a mixture of understanding the personalities that you have on your team, trying to recruit personalities that will bring that. And also, like I tell my guys, like, hey, if we don't get a bench warning for celebrating when we're playing well, like we're not celebrating enough. Like you guys are not picking each other like up enough. And I tell them, like, hey, never get a technical, never go on the floor, never do those
Mhm.
things. But if a referee's not telling you to sit down, then you guys aren't doing it right. Like we need to be that team that the referees know, like, hey, they're going to be excited every game. And I mean, hopefully no referees hear this and think negatively, obviously. But yeah, that's one thing that I talk about too, is like, hey, like it's okay to ride that line of being too excited for somebody else when we're on the bench. And I kind of tell them, like, when we're in games, I tell them, hey, we don't celebrate a ton when we're in games because we focus on every single possession. So when we make that shot, we need to move on to the next defensive possession. And that's got to be the most important thing. And I tell my guys, like, when you're on the bench, that's your time to celebrate everything. Like, you have a great time on the bench. That's when you celebrate. But when you're in between the lines, it's the next possession, it's focused on the next play, like all those little things. And I talk a lot about just in terms of like concept stuff, like winning the first 3 seconds. Because to me, the first 3 seconds of every possession is the most important 3 seconds. So.
Yeah, no, 100%. And there's going to be, and I'm curious for you in terms of an in-game coaching perspective, right? Your players, they know that they're, earning everything and they got to fight for everything. You talked about, concepts about rebounding and all the other things that they really got to be locked in on and zeroed in on. And how do you kind of manage during a game when maybe your players are struggling a little bit. The effort is there. They're trying, but like, they're not getting that rebound or, that loose ball, that 50-50 ball, like, they're not getting it for whatever reason. How do you make sure that like you as a coach, how do you kind of diagnose like if the effort isn't there or the effort isn't there, or it's just like it is there, but it's just, maybe a shot isn't falling or the rebound isn't there. How do you kind of manage that as a coach about whether or not this is just a basketball related issue that you're seeing where there's a struggle here, or if it's every earn everything effort sort of issue that's missing during a game?
Yeah, for me, I mean, honestly, I won't say much to a guy
Hmm.
if they're giving full effort. Like my thing is if you fail while you're giving full effort, that's a positive. Like you did everything you could in that situation. If you don't give full effort and you fail, then I can coach that and I can hold them accountable. And then it's kind of, I don't know, working on the everyday stuff in practice too, like talking about grabbing a rebound with 2 hands or whatever that might be, whatever we can get better at in those situations. And then I mean, it kind of depends. Like it depends if they're not getting that loose ball because they don't have great leverage compared to the other person, then yeah, I'll tell them like, hey, get a little bit lower, get that good leverage, and you'll come up with that ball. But like, I appreciate your effort. Keep giving that. And I always try to hype up that effort piece. And I never go down on a guy if they're giving great effort. We had a kid today who, I mean, was doing everything right.
Yeah.
Um, airballed a shot and was kind of down on himself. And I made every single guy on our team clap it up for him and pick him up because like he gave such great effort that play that he did everything he could control.
Yeah, and that to me that seems like a really big emphasis on your culture, and it's not always results oriented. It's not necessarily what the outcome is, but the effort that went into that outcome, and that players, I imagine, know that it's not just all black and white, like, oh, either we did the result or we didn't get the result, that if the effort was there to try and get that result, that is still going to be acknowledged. And that, I imagine, has to make a big difference for your players when they know that it's not like a black and white, like, oh, if we win, then everything must have been great and we did everything well. And if we lost, like, well, that means we didn't do something right. And, we completely messed up everything. I think they understand and can appreciate there's some level of nuance there, and where the effort gets factored in.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes honestly, like I've used a lot of lines like if we or before, at least when I was coaching the JV team, like one night we went out, we played really hard, like we earned that. And then the next night we didn't play hard. We thought we were going to win the game. And I said, "Hey fellas, like that's not the result we wanted, but that's the result you earned. Like you didn't put in effort to win that
Mm-hmm.
game, and this is what we earned. Like this is what happens." And then yeah, we'll talk, I mean, just a lot about those little nuances of it's okay to fail as long as we're giving effort. And then I always talk a lot on never play to the score. Like if we're up, if it's tied, whatever it may be, like we don't need to look at the score unless or until there's like 2 minutes left in the game. Like we don't need to play to that until it's crunch time and we might need to change how we're doing things. But we never play to the score. We play for that possession and we go all out for that possession. And it's a pretty beautiful thing when your guys really do that. I know, I mean, going back to like the JV team stuff, we played a lot of really good NJCAA schools, and my entire message would be, hey, you guys do not get to look up at the scoreboard one time. If I see you look up at the score, I take you out of the game because you're
Wow.
not locked in. We
Yeah.
focus on that possession. And it was actually a beautiful thing. Like we had so many games that at that 2 minute mark, I would call a timeout and go, all right, fellas, we're down 6 points. Like, good job. Our effort was there, and this is what we earned. Now we have a chance to win the game.
It's easy, I imagine, for players to look ahead or to, just think about something else and not be there in that moment. But right, like to your point, I think that's a kind of a good point for coaches listening. Like, how many times do players like maybe look ahead on something or lose sight of something, then all of a sudden they have a turnover and then they give up a layup, and then there's 3 or 4 or 5 bad possessions in a row just because they weren't locked in that moment. And I think by understanding that the next moment is what matters, like they can focus on exactly what's in front of them, and they don't have to like get overwhelmed by what the score is or who's in the crowd or any of this other stuff. Like they focus on what they need to do in that particular moment, and then the next moment happens after that. And for that too, I imagine, I can let you speak to that, like it allows players, I imagine, to have a lot of chances to see success, where even if they aren't necessarily being successful a couple times down the court, maybe these next free possessions, no matter what it is that happens, maybe they're seeing success in those, and that way it's just not all measured by like what happens on the scoreboard.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk a lot about what is success as well. Like we kind of
Sure.
define what our version of
Okay.
success is. And to us, like seeing success is seeing effort and seeing like us flying around and us communicating and us picking each other up. Like those are successful possessions, whether that ball goes in or it doesn't, or we end up with that loose ball or we don't. Like if the effort's there, that's success. And I think to me, if the effort's always there, then the result's going to kind of come. Like I talk a lot with my guys about like, hey, if you do things the right way, the result is going to, or if you do things the correct way, the result's going to be correct. But if we slip, if we don't do things the correct way, we're going to get that other result. And that looks like a lot of different things. And honestly, one of the challenges of the earn everything culture is the time that, I mean, your guys play really hard, but you don't win the game or you don't end up at the top of the list or whatever it may be. Like that's a challenge because so many players after the game are just like, man, we did everything we could and we didn't win. And it's not always, hey, we're not good enough. Sometimes it's just like, man, the ball didn't just or the ball tonight didn't bounce our way. Like we couldn't make a shot and we can't really control that, but we can control our effort and those things. And those were there. So I try to talk a lot on, hey, it might be a loss in on the schedule column of the wins and losses, but today was a win for us getting better. Like we got better today. So it's all kind of those little things that, I mean, just as me, I have to be smart with my terminology. And if I ever mess up with my terminology, I will apologize to my team in front of them and I will correct my terminology right on the spot in terms of like, hey, I used this, I should have used this, and I
Mm.
apologize for that. And I think that goes a long way with them seeing like, hey, coach made a mistake, he apologized, we're moving on and we're getting better. And then they can get that comfortability of like, hey, I can make a mistake and I can move on and still be better. So
And that's a cool point that you brought up about the mindset and the way that you communicate as well, because as you mentioned, right, players could be given maximum effort doing everything that they can, but the scoreboard may not be there and the win-loss record might not be there. And it's really easy, I imagine, for players to feel like discouraged when they feel like they're giving everything they can, but they feel like they don't have the wins and losses to show for it. And so for you as a coach to also not get too fixated or too worried about that sort of thing, and think that like it's all about wins and losses, and we have to, be at a certain win-loss record. The way that you kind of frame that conversation, the way that you kind of get your guys in the right mindset is super important. And so, I think for a coach listening too, that's something to keep in mind, is that we hope that this idea of maximum effort, earning everything, will lead to certain results on the scoreboard. But if
mhm.
they don't and your players are still doing it, you still need to be happy and be, celebrating, and keep things positive, because they're doing, everything that they can, which is all you could ask for as a coach.
Yeah, and that's kind of something that I lean back on with the setting the goal stuff too. Is like
Yeah.
when we were setting goals, I told our guys like, "Hey, these can't be wins loss things. They can't be things that are unmeasurable, but like they have to be effort and like things about us building into the best team we can be." And then I'll during the year we set goals for multiple things. Our preseason stuff before we even get into games, our yeah, before we get into regular season, like the non-conference games, we set goals for those, and then we set goals for our conference, and then we don't talk about like the tournament stuff until we reach that. Then we set goals for those, and the conference ones and the tournament stuff can be more of that ranking or wins losses or whatever it may be. Obviously, everybody wants to win a championship,
Yeah.
but in the meantime of leading up to that, I try my best not to focus on wins losses, what the scoreboard says. Like I try to focus on just the possession ahead and how we can keep improving. And I try to be mindful too when I'm talking before the game. If I'm giving my pregame speech, like I'm going to talk on those things. And then post game, I'm going to bring those things up as well. Like if we do win the game, I'm going to say, like, hey, because we did these things to a high level, the result was correct. And if we lose the game, then obviously I can point out, like, hey, we didn't rebound with them. We didn't do these things. We didn't meet our goals there. But I can always go back to that goal of like, hey, did we get better in a certain area today? Or like, where were we lacking? And with these goals that you guys set, what do we need to do to move forward and improve?
Yeah. And I like the idea of like they can't be like win-loss oriented, right? Because that's probably something your players want to go to right away, and having to have
Yeah.
them think a little bit beyond that into things that are beyond, just like what's on the scoreboard. I imagine is maybe something that they don't necessarily think of as their first goal when that
Yeah.
comes to mind, right? That's
Yeah.
awesome. Before we hit our concluding segment, Coach, I did want to ask you, since, like I said, I do have a lot of first-time coaches or new coaches that are listening. What would your advice be to a new coach who might be thinking like, okay, what do I need to do? I'm here in a new spot. I love this idea of, this culture, earn everything, having a great culture. What is it that I got to do in the first week or 2 weeks to really set myself up for a successful season? What advice would you give to a coach who's kind of maybe going through that thought process or thinking about that right now?
I think the best advice I could give is build meaningful relationships. Go past just the basketball stuff. Try your best to get to know your players on a personal level. Show that you love and care for them, because if you do those things, when you hold them accountable to a high level, they will respond positively and it won't be a negative thing. But if you're just kind of that surface level person that once you get on them, then it's easier for them to think like, oh, coach doesn't care, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But when you get beyond that surface level piece, then they kind of listen to your message more. And it's also the standards that you set for your team have to be all around. It's got to be with your assistants. It's got to be for yourself. And really, like I'm honest with my guys about how much I work, how hard I'm working, what I'm doing. Like today, I got a couple things done in terms of the showcases we're coming to. And I put in the group chat, hey, fellas, tickets are bought. We're good to go. Like, this is where we're at. Like, I let them know a little bit too, like, hey, I'm working hard for you guys in the background. So when we're face to face, like, the expectations are like, you work hard for us as well. And it's not for me, it's for the group. And it's just kind of that messaging of like, hey, it's about everyone, and really setting that standard with yourself, with your actions, and then really trying to build those meaningful pieces, or really trying to build those meaningful relationships.
And even that, like you said, is that'd be even great for coaches who maybe are trying to restart their culture too, or rebuild their culture, right? I think it's always good to kind
Hmm.
of reestablish, like, are the relationships with your players like where you want them to be. I know it's easy to get, so, caught up in all the basketball stuff, all the executive decisions that you make, that I know, I mean, sometimes it could happen to me where I like kind of lose sight of the players as people, and need to make sure I consciously invest in those relationships. So 100% agree there. To wrap up, Coach, a couple questions that I ask every guest, and it's been crazy how quickly this hour flew by, but that's
Yeah.
awesome. You've shared so much great stuff. So I want to ask just a couple quick questions that I ask every guest here, starting with thinking back on your coaching career. What is a specific moment from your coaching career that you think by listening or excuse me, that by sharing, our listeners would be able to learn from?
Oh, I think, gosh, that's a tough question. It's a loaded one. I think really just kind of the grind of it is big. I know when my last year at Spokane, I was waking up at 4:30 in the morning. I was working at a car rental place, checking in cars from 4:30 to noon. I was going to the gym at noon. I was doing all my assistant coaching things up to practice. I would go to practice, and then I'd work from or 2.5 hours after practice in our fitness center. And just looking back, it's really just the grind that it's been, that it's a struggle. It's not always, or you aren't always in the best position financially or whatever it may be. But if you're solidly making an impact on other people, like that's kind of what I try to focus on, is that impact I can make.
Mhm.
And that's just one thing that I look back on a lot. Like maybe, I mean, there's days where honestly it's hard sometimes. Like, man, do I really want to keep doing this? Do I want to do this for another year? Whatever it may be. But when I think back to that time, like, hey, I was working however many hours a day, sleeping very little. And I did this to get to the spot I'm at. Like, I have to lock myself back in. I have to do those things for the group of guys that I care about. And then just in terms of like just kind of the basketball piece of things. The one that, or the things that really stand out to me are the locker rooms after losses, really like how hard it is. Like when you lose that championship game or whatever it is, like if you have guys that are emotional, openly emotional, you can be openly emotional with those guys. Like whatever you did that year, you might not have won that last game, but man, you did a really good job of building your culture because guys are okay showing their emotions, and they care so much that it brought them to tears or whatever that may look like for that individual. But I feel like that the end of the year stuff is kind of stuff that really sticks out for me, and just that emotion that plays into it. And I think that really tells like if your guys are bought in and they really care for each other, is if they can be emotional with each other at that level.
Awesome. No, that's great. Really, really awesome. Appreciate you sharing that. To wrap up, Coach, I give every guest kind of what I call a 60-second soapbox. You can go over 60 seconds. I'm certainly not going to time you, but
Yeah.
your platform to kind of get out kind of a final thought, a final message, a closing idea, something that you just want to leave the listeners with. Feel free to take it any direction you want, basketball wise, coaching wise, otherwise. It is your soapbox after all. So, Coach, I'm just going to go ahead and give you the floor and let you take it from here.
Yeah, first off, I want to thank you for having me on. Let me tell you about my program doing those things. And then, yeah, thank all the listeners for tuning in. Hopefully, I can help you in some sort of way. And if you guys ever do need anything, my information's on the website and I'm open to talk to anybody about it. But really, just, yeah, all you coaches that are about the right things and you're about your program and you're about the guys on the team and you genuinely care for people, keep doing what you're doing. Because I firmly believe that's going to lead to success, whether it might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but in the long run, building that culture is one of the most important things you can do. And getting that buy-in from your guys because you genuinely care about them will go a really long way. That's probably the best advice I can give is show that you genuinely care with your actions, with your words, all those things as much as you can, however you can, whatever that looks like for you. And then, yeah, keep fighting the good fight and keep trying to help kids and keep trying to, yeah, grow the youth and helping them, because really you never know what their situations are at home. You don't know what they have going on. So always be mindful of how you talk to them about outside aspects as well. But yeah, keep fighting the good fight and keep genuinely caring.
Hey, and that message extends to you, Coach. I really do appreciate you coming on, talking about your program, talking about your experiences and this idea of earning everything and what that looks like, especially at the collegiate level. I think it's awesome, and I think it's great that your guys are bought in and they're supporting each other, holding each other accountable. Things are positive, and I'm really excited to follow your journey at Treasure Valley and see where you're able to kind of take the program as that culture really, take shape and you really hit the ground running with everything. So Coach Holbrook, again, super appreciate it. It was super hearing all your thoughts and all your ideas, and best of luck, not just this coming season, but beyond that as well. I really do appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Coach. You as well.
Take care, everyone. Thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.